Right. Good evening, everyone. We are on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. We are the second line. Pas lemay nechushla. The last thing that we got started with yesterday was that there were four items that required a double seal because we were worried that non-Jews potentially may even forge a single seal because of the value of the items, or however we're gonna see what that is. The acronym was Chavis, Ches Beis Yud Taf, and we knew that those things are chalav, milk, meat, wine, and tchelas. All of those four items require a double seal in order to ensure that they are genuine if they're being transferred from with a non-Jewish messenger in between. And similarly, right, we've explained most of the yain we talked about, the tchelas we just talked about, the meat we talked about, these because they'll switch them up. So now when it comes to the items that only require a single seal, so those are champag, and champag is stands for philtis was the fish that has no scales, and we're worried that there may be the what's it called non-kosher fish that are going to be in there. Morius, we're worried that they were going to put some wine into the brine and potentially then create problems there. Pas was bread and gavina was cheese, and all of those are okay with one seal. So let's talk about that. Pas lamay nechoshlo. What would we be concerned about as far as a non-Jew handling bread? Imi shumichlufei. So if we're talking about maybe he's going to change, he's going to exchange. He's been given a bread, a loaf of kosher bread, and he goes, "Hey, this is better than my bread, right? And therefore I want to exchange it." Well, we would presume that what makes it better, the answer is we would presume that it makes it better is that it's fresher. So if that's the case, bechamima, karira bechamima, miyada yadia. People are going to know the difference between a warm bread and a cold bread, right? If the person sent him a warm bread, he goes, "Hey, this looks amazing. Let's exchange this for my cold bread." Well, then the guy who receives it is going to know this is not fresh bread, so that's not going to work. He can't exchange that. Dechiti b'disari, and if you're talking about that he might exchange wheat bread for barley bread, nami miyada that's also going to be obvious. Those things don't look the same either. So therefore, there's a clear rationale why those things we shouldn't be worried about switching because they're recognizable. Iki hadadi, if we're just switching one loaf of bread for another loaf of bread, the answer is one seal is sufficient to prevent that. There's not that much significance. He's got a loaf of bread that's wheat and it's cold already, and you've got a loaf of bread that's wheat and it's cold. He might switch it if he likes the loaf of bread that you're giving better, but for one with one seal, he's not going to bother. It's not worth it, and therefore he won't. V'Rav Maishna. So okay, so then okay, V'Rav. So Rav says Maishna Gvina. What's the difference with cheese? Why is one cheese why is cheese also only require one seal? So Delot Tarch Mezayif. So because he's not going to bother the value of the cheese, he's not going to bother to exchange it either. It's not worth it. So one seal is going to be sufficient. So then chalav nami lo tarich mezayif. So then milk is the same thing. Why does milk need a double seal? So Rav Kahana says, apik chalav va'ayo chatichas dag. You're right. Milk only needs one seal. So if you were worried about why your milk only has one seal, there's no double seal in your milk. It's not necessary. That was a mistake. The ches does not stand for milk. The ches stands for chatichas dag, a piece of fish. Piece of fish might, because it's valuable, more valuable, so that he might exchange. She'ein ba simon, where there's no fins or scales on it. Obviously, if you send salmon's the only, I think, pink fish, right, on the inside, so it's clear that it's kosher fish. If it's going to be a tuna, and it looks like the inside of another fish, but he's got the skin on it, so again, also, it's clear what kind of fish it is. We have to be talking about he sends him a piece that has no signs on it. So hainu basar. Well, if that's the case, then what's the difference between fish and meat? Meat is already on the list. Chavis included basar. Meat was already one of the four things that required a double seal. Now you're telling me that fish requires a double seal. It's the exact same thing, meat and fish. The answer is trigavni basar. There's two types of meat on the list. That's fine. Fish and meat can both be on the list. They're just two types of meat and same reason. Ushmuel Amar Shmuel says bias usr, that he says you're going to leave that piece out. The ches is going to be removed, right? There's no reason to put two types of meat. So therefore, leave the fish out and just talk about meat, wine, and tchelas. Those are all prohibited b'chosim echad with one seal. And then he also has machag mutter b'chosim echad. That also he's going to take out he's going to take out the pas, the bread. Doesn't even need one seal, right? He's going to say these are all permissible with one seal, the machag. So basar yain tchelas asurin bechosim echad. So we understand that meat, wine, and tchelas are all prohibited if there's only one seal. It's too tempting for somebody who's the shipper to make an exchange and profit out of it. Okay, now Morius chiltis gevina mutar bechosim echad. The Morius, which we were worried that the salesperson might put some wine in there in order to add filler to it, or chiltis fish, which he might have non-kosher fish mixed in, and gvina and cheese, those are all okay with only one seal. So echad l'shmuel chatichas dag she'im bo simon hainu basar. So he says, so now according to so Shmuel says, what about fish? Fish also needs to have two signs on it. So according to this version, he says that Trey Gavni Basar Lo Amrinan, he doesn't list meat twice. He says fish is the same thing as meat, so there's no reason to list the meat as important or not. Okay, so now, Tana Rabbanan Rabbi Ein Lochin Yud Memches Gimel Besuria. We're not going to take Yud Memches, which we're going to explain what those things are, or these what do you call it? Memches Gimel. What are they? Lo yayin, we're not allowed to purchase wine. Velo morius. Morius is this morius again that you're going to have vinegar and you're going to have you're going to have wine mixed in with it. Velo chalav, or the milk, which we've discussed. Velo melach sal konderis, and not sal konderis salt, which we'll explain what that is. Velo chiltis, the chiltis fish we've been discussing was that fish that had some non-kosher fish mixed into it. Velo gvina, and not cheese, which we've also discussed. Ella minamumcha, unless you're selling from a master salesperson, as we said, and in that case, they don't adulterate their product and their integrity stands with them. The kulon im nisarech etzel butzer bias. In all of these cases, if you are a guest at somebody's house, mutter, you can eat these items. Now, you worry, it's in somebody's house and it's not in a sealed container. Who's to say that they're kosher? So the answer is that's fine because it's Misayele Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. This supports what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says. Dom Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Shagar lo balabayas lebeso, if you get a present from somebody who is a Shomer Shabbos, a kosher yid, right, and he sends you an item, mutter, you can trust the kashrus. Right? If Jeff sends me something, I could presume it's kosher. Why? My time, what's the reason? Balabayas lo shoveketera v'achli surah. That guy, he wouldn't himself eat something not kosher. He wouldn't leave the permissible item and eat the non-kosher item. So therefore, one can presume what he's sending you is what he himself would eat. That's what makes it a present. So therefore, you don't have to worry if you are getting it from one other person. Umelech sal kundris. Now we had this new item on our list. All of these other items we've discussed at length, but sal kundris salt is prohibited to buy in a place called in this Surya place. Why is it? So my melech sal kundris. What is this sal kundris salt? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said, name of Shmuel, melech shekol sal kundri romi ochlinosa. This is the salt that all the bakers of Rome, they eat it. This is their salt, and we're going to see what the problem with it is. They used to mix in order to be able to chunk it up. I guess maybe, I'm not sure whether it was for storage or whether it was for safekeeping. I don't know why they did it, but they used to mix fish fat into the salt in order to clump it up. And therefore, you might have non-kosher fish fat in this salt, and that's why you couldn't purchase it. Yes, Yehuda. Yehuda, you're muted.
The circular salt. If it didn't have the fish fat in it, and you bought it from a non-Jew,
so if you bought it from a non-Jew, you could not have it, right? And also, it seems to be two items, right? If you buy it from a Jew, you're fine. And if you buy it from a place where it's not made with non-kosher food, non-kosher fish, because the non-kosher fish are not found there, then it would also be fine. It happens to be that in
Even if the
Syria,
seller is even if the seller is not
even if
Jewish, you're talking.
yes, like we've had in other circumstances where we found there were certain places like the Bova River, the Dubov River, the same, I can't remember the name of the river, right? But it was something like that. That river is doesn't have non-kosher fish in it. And so therefore the Chiltis was the Chiltis was from that location was fine. So too, this would potentially could also be fine from that location, but from Syria you couldn't have it. Shechora asura levana muteris. If it's black, then it's prohibited. Levana, if it's white, then it's okay. Divra Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Yehuda says levana asura. No, the white one is no good. Shechora muteris, the black one is good. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel, Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Omer Zu v'Zu asura, both are no good. So Amar Rabbi Bar Rabbi Bar explains that Amar Rabbi Yochanan, L'divrei Amar Levana Asur, the guy who says that white is no good is Kirvei Dogim Levanim Tameim Meruvim Ba. It's because they have the fats from the insides of a fish where the fish's insides are white. And that's how it became white. L'divrei Omer Shchora, the one who says that it was black, is Asura Kirvei Dogim Shchorim Tameim Uravim Ba. It's got fish fats from the insides of black fish, or from the insides, I guess, are black. And that's what made it non-kosher. And L'divrei Mezuvazu Asura, the person who says that they're both prohibited, Zev Zem Uravim Ba, you can wind up having both white fish fats and black fish fats. And so therefore stay away from that are not kosher, therefore stay away from both. So therefore, it's just a matter of which kinds of fats got mixed in, whether you had black one or white one, and which one you could have, which one you couldn't. Rabbi Avo, Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Zakein Echad Hayam Bishkunasenu. So Rabbi Avo said the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. There was a certain elder who was in our neighborhood. Shahiyam Machlik Paneha Bishuman Chazir. He used to. He used to. I guess it was. He was a non-Jew, and he used to coat the salt with pig fat, right, with lard. So there's another thing that they could possibly add to the salt that would create problems. So you would just stay with it. So Hare Elu Asurim, the Mishnah said, these are all things that are prohibited to eat, but not to get benefit. So whenever the Mishnah ends up with the rule, Hare Elu, we mean these things, but not others. So Limute Mai, what things are we excluding from this list? So Lechizkiah, according to Chizkiah, Limute Bigadua. So Chizkiah says we're excluding the cases where we know for sure that wine or vinegar got added as ingredients. If we know for sure, right, as we had heard Chizkiah's position before, that if we know for sure, then then it's going to be prohibited to get benefit from as well. It's only the reason. Now that was one opinion. The other opinion said no. Once it's mixed in, it doesn't make a difference. Even if you know for sure, it's not prohibited to get benefit. So Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, lemuti morius ugvinas base onaiki. That we're talking about Morius and Gvinas based Unaiki, which were in last Mishnah. The Morius because they did add in the wine in order to improve the flavor, and also the cheese of the house of the place of Onaiki because they were using Avodah Zara. And we were actually in the end, as Tosfos says, it was the issue was because of snake venom, and according to Rashi, because they were mixing in non-kosher milk, and stomach Rabbi Meir, and this Mishnah is following Rabbi Meir's opinion that those circumstances, those items are prohibited to get benefit from. And so therefore, in this Mishnah, these are items that you can get benefit from. So therefore, they're excluded from the list. Okay, good. That finishes that Mishnah. Let's move on to the next items. It says the next Mishnah, these are the things that you're allowed to eat. Okay, these are kosher. If a non-Jew milks a animal, and a Jew observes him. Okay, v'hadvash, and also honey. Honey requires no hachsher. Okay. I'm going to read that wrong. Davnios, clusters of grapes, even though the grape juice may be flowing because the grapes are so bursting with juice, even if the juice is flowing over the grapes are fine. Ein by mishum hechsher mashke, and we don't have to worry that even though grape juice or wine generally is a liquid that transmits tumo, we'll explain that as we go along, that impurity can be transmitted through 7 specific liquids: yad, shchat, dam, wine, blood, the oil, milk, tal is dew, and dam is honey, and mem is water. So all seven of those liquids are the ones that can you could transfer. And so wine seems to be like grape juice. You should theoretically be able to transfer tuma, but these do not, and we'll explain why. Kvashin, shein darken lasix l'tochon yain v'chometz. If you've got pickled vegetables that they don't normally add vinegar to the ingredients in order to pickle them. Vitoris she'ena terufa. And if you've got the taurus fish and it is not cut into pieces, which means that you can clearly see that it comes from the taurus fish, this small salted fish. And before we said that it was a problem because it got cut up, so then it was going to be hard to be able to tell. Vitzir sheyesh b'daga, and if you've got brine that it has inside of it this kilbis fish, as we said, the kilbis fish indicates that the brine is kosher. The Allah shel chiltis, if you've got not the chiltis that we said before that was cut, and then we worried about the non-kosher knives that they were using. This is the chiltis that's on the leaves. So they're selling leaves with clusters of chiltis attached. That's fine. The zeise gluskos hamegulgalin. They would have olives and they would press them into round containers in order to be able to allow them to soften up and become ready to have oil flow from them. So if you've got olives that are stuck, smushed together in these round containers, those are going to be fine. We're going to see why you might think that they wouldn't be fine is going to be because you might think that they, in order to soften them up, might have added wine to them in order to soften them up. And you don't have to worry about that. That was not commonly done. They don't like wine in their oil, as we've discussed. That's why oil itself is not problematic. So therefore, you don't have to worry about that. But Rabbi Yossi says, Hashloch in Asur, and if you've got some olives that are so soft that the pits just fall out when you pick up the olives, that's going to be prohibited because they don't get that soft without adding something. And so therefore, that's where you have to worry. Hachagavim habayim min hasalula asurin min haheptik mutorin. If you've got grasshoppers, if they come from the storehouse, if they come from the basket in front of the storekeeper, right? He's got his collection of grasshoppers, and you're going to take a handful, right? That's what they used to sell them. I guess it's like they used to sell jelly beans, right? It's the same kind of idea. So the stay away from the black ones, Yehuda. The black ones are no good.
Right? Basically in bulk.
Right. So those you can't have. You can't take those. But if he takes a fresh batch from the storehouse, that's going to be okay. And v'chein l'truma, the same thing is going to be true of truma. We're going to see in the Gemara why that is. Says the Gemara, Tanina lahaditana rabbanon. We have a Mishnah which is also follows the same idea as what we learned in a Brisa. Yoshev Yisrael betzad edro shel ovdei kochavim. A Jew can sit beside a flock of non-Jewish persons' animals. V'ovdei kochavim cholev lo umevi lo. And a non-Jew can then milk the animals for him and bring him the milk. Ve'eno choshesh, and you don't have to worry. You didn't see him do it. You were there. Okay. Hey, Chidami, what's the case? Ideleka davar tame bedro. If he has no non-kosher animals on his farm, so pshita, then obvious, right? What were you checking for? What was your job as the mashgiach? To make sure that no pigs were floating around. Well, he has none. All he has is cows. So then clearly it's cow milk. So then ve'ika davar tame bedro. Now, if he's got cows, but he also has camels, so then maybe he's got some camel milk mixed in. So then why is it permissible? You didn't see him. He disappeared into the barn. He comes out with a bucket of milk. How do you know what he milked? So liolam dika davar tamei. No, we are talking about a case where he has non-kosher animals in his farm. When he stands up, he can see, right? Could be goat milk, Yehuda, right? If he stands up, he can see the non-Jew doing his milking. And when he sits down, he does not see him. Mahu de tema, what would you have thought? Kevin to Yosef lo chazi. Look, you're sitting down. You're not actually watching him milk the animal. It's a problem. Nechush dilma maisi ma'arev be. You don't know what he did when you weren't seeing him. Kamash malon. So therefore, this comes to tell us the rule for mashgichen. Kevan dechi koi chazi le. Since you could see him if you stood up, irtusi mirtus. He's nervous. He's scared that he's going to get caught. And therefore he's not going to mix anything in. That's the rule. That's where we get this concept of a yodse v'nichnas, a mashgiach who comes in and out of an establishment. You may not have a mashgiach who's there the entire time, but if the mashgiach comes in and shows up unannounced on a regular basis, the store owner presumably would be nervous about getting caught and losing his hechsher. He won't do the wrong thing even when you're not there, and we can rely on that, according to this Gemara. V'hadvash. Next thing is honey. Dvash l'may nechoshlov. What would we be concerned about for honey? Why do we even have to mention honey as being kosher? Why would we be worried? Imi shumiyah ruve, if you're worried that maybe he's going to put some wine in. Misra, sorry. Putting wine in your honey ruins honey. That's not something that they would do. Imi shum bishulei ovde kochavim. So if you're worried that maybe they cook the honey, I don't know if they pasteurize honey, but they cooked. I didn't have pasteurization then. But if they're going to cook the honey, they didn't want to make it raw. They would cook the honey. I would suppose the reason why they're cooking their honey is because most of their honey came from dates, not from bees. And so therefore, as a result, it was probably cooking the dates that would then get mushed up and create the honey. So if you're worried about them being cooked, and therefore you've got a bishul akum problem, which we've discussed, so they'll nechol kamoshu chai, you shouldn't have to worry about that because you can eat dates raw. And so therefore, if it can be eaten raw, there's no bishul akum problem at all. So therefore, that can't be a problem. Imishum gi'ule ovde kochavim. If you're worried about the fact that maybe they cooked their dates in a pot that belongs to a non-Jew, and he has a non-kosher pot, and it's going to transmit the flavors. So no sein tam lifgam hu mutter. It's not going to be an issue because it gives a bad flavor. So therefore, Mishnah says these are things you might have thought to worry about, but you don't have to worry about them. And therefore, honey is perfectly fine. Next is v'hadav dovnios. These are the clusters of grapes. Afal pishim and natfos, even though they are dripping with grape juice, ein bahem mishum hechsher mashki. You don't have to worry about liquid transferring the tuma. Or many, but we have a contradiction to that. Habotzer legas. If somebody's harvesting grapes for a wine press, Shammai Omer Shammai says, Huchsher, that liquid that is on the grapes before they squeeze it, that wine can transmit, that liquid, that grape juice can transmit tumah. And Hillel Omer, Hillel says, no, Huchsher, it's not there. The Odile Hillel l'Shammai, but then Hillel changed his mind and he agreed with Shammai. This is one of those circumstances, again, that day that Shammai overruled Hillel on many things. So therefore, this again is a circumstance where the practical halacha is that the grape juice does transfer tumah. So how does our Mishnah say it doesn't? So the answer is hasam kaboy leilamashke, hachalok kaboy leilamashke. The difference is that when the Torah talks about the transference of impurities through liquids, it uses a phrase called v'chi yuton, which means when liquid is placed on an object. Now, the word yuton is spelled yud taf nun, which can be pronounced ki yitain, when you will place. And the Gemara in many places explains that in order for liquid to transmit tumah, it has to be placed there with intention. Or even if it's not placed there with intention, it has to be desirous for it to be there. So meaning, if you've got grain that's outdoors and it rains and now it's all wet, well, you don't want that water to be there. As a result, the fact you don't want that water to be there, even if something tummy touches that grain, that water does not transmit tumah. On the other hand, if you were washing your hands and now you want the water, and then as after that water you touch something that's tummy, that would transfer tumah. So if you want the liquid, then it transfers tumah. If you don't want the liquid, it doesn't transfer tumah. If you're harvesting grapes in order to squeeze them for juice or wine, clearly you want the liquid. Therefore, that wine transmits tumah. Our Mishnah's case is grapes for eating. As a result of grapes for eating, that liquid that's on the grapes, you don't want it, right? It's not necessary. You're going to wash it off anyway. So therefore, that liquid does not transmit tumah, does not transmit impurities. And that's why it's okay according to our Mishnah. The Taurus sheina trufa. Then we have the Taurus fish that is not cut up. Tanar Rabbanan Rai learned. Ezu hi Taurus sheina trufa. What is the definition of Taurus that is not cut up? It is kol sherosh v'shedra nikar. It has to be have pieces enough that the head and the spine are still visible. You could tell what kind of a fish it is by looking at the head and the spine. The head and the spine of kosher fish tend to be wider, and they have a spine. Non-kosher fish tend to have thinner faces, and non-kosher fish have no spines. So ve'ezo tzir sheyesh bad, and now that is not a universal kosher symbol, right? That's this discussion in Rishonim, that if I then know that a fish has a thin head and no spine, or one or the other, does that make the fish not kosher? And this is not a universal sign. That's why the Torah gives us fins and scales as the universal sign, as the thing that we should look for, So at least we're just going to be, for the sake of not getting too deep into this Rashi versus others' arguments, we're not going to trust the fact the shape of the head and if it doesn't have a backbone, then it's almost for sure not kosher, right? Because all the kosher fish have a backbone. But just because it has a backbone doesn't make it a kosher fish. So that's not a siman of kashrus. Ve'ezu tzir sheish b'daga. What is the brine that has this fish, the kilbis fish? Kol she kilbis achas o shtei kilbios shotetos. Pages. Shotetos bo. As long as you've got the one or two kilbis fishes, fish shot, no fishes, fish, right. If they're two species, they're fishes. If they're multiples of the same species, they are fish. Right? That was my grammar lesson. So there are two kilbis fish floating around. So that's one or two, then that is acceptable. So hashta kilbis achas amar. Now you said all I need is one kilbis fish in this brine in order to determine that it's kosher. So shtei kilbias me boy. Why would I need? I mentioned over a memo aleph. I don't know if I mentioned that memo aleph. So then two. Why do I have to mention two? Obviously, if one is okay, I don't need two. So lo kash, it's not a contradiction. Kan bipsuchos kan bistumos depends if the barrel is open or closed. If the barrel is open, the potential is that the kilbis fish fell in from another area, from another place, from another barrel that was kosher. And so the presence of the kilbis fish doesn't necessarily prove. But if I have two kilbis fish, then the kilbis fish is definitely there for a reason. If they're sealed, then the only reason there's a kilbis fish in there is because that brine is kosher. So that's where you might need one, you might need two. Itmar, third line on Daf Memonov. Itmar. Rav, it's been said, a statement from the Amoraim. Rav Huna says, Achete Rosh V'Shedra Nikar, you need to have the head and the spine recognizable. Rav Nachman Amar, O Rosh, O Shedra, you just need the head or the spine. You don't need both. Meisiv Rav Ukva Bar Chama. Rav Ukva Bar Chama said, Ubedagim Kol Sheyesh Lo Snapir V'Kaskeses. So he says, well, 1 second. Why are you worried about the fish's head and the spine? Shouldn't we be worried about fins and scales? That's what the Torah says, that we should be worried about fins and scales. So Amar Abaye says Kitanya he ba'ara upalmuda dedamu rushayhu litzmeim. We're talking about the ara fish and the palmuda fish. They have heads that, as we said, look like non-kosher fish heads. They have skinny heads, and they are kosher fish, but you have to look at fins and scales in order to determine that they are kosher, because they look like non-kosher fish, but they are kosher. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmei de Ula, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Ula, Machlokes Litavel Bitziron. The argument about whether is let's see, turn this. The argument that says that whether you need the head and the spine, or you need just the head or the spine, is a circumstance where we're relying on whether or not we're allowed to dip into the brine or not. Aval, begufon, if you're going to eat the fish itself, divrei kol also, everyone would agree that's not going to be acceptable. You can't rely on just the head or the spine. You need both, that's for sure. Because if you're going to eat the fish, then you need to be more sure. If you're going to have the brine, there's reason to be lenient, because it might not be, it's probably kosher. You could be more lenient on the brine than the fish itself. Ad sheyehe rosh v'shedra nikar. If you eat the fish itself, you need both the head and the spine. Amar Reb Zera says, Miresh hava matbilna betziron. He says, I used to dip my bread into that brine in order to eat it. Now that I heard what Rav just said, that to eat the fish, you really need both. So now the Dama Rabbi Yehuda said what Rabbi Yehuda said, Mishmei Dula, name of Ula, Machlokas L'Tavel B'Tziron. The argument is only to dip into the brine, Aval Begufan Divrei Kol Aser, but to eat the fish itself would be prohibited. Ad Shei Rosh V'Shedra Nikar B'Tziron Nami Lo Matvilna. He says, well, then that sounds like we're worried about the fish not being kosher. If that's the case, I'm not dipping in the brine either, right? I know you said the brine is fine, but that sounds fishy. Right? That's right. You want to be able to say that the brine is acceptable while the fish is not acceptable. If the fish is not acceptable, I'm staying away from the brine as well. We don't have any of these foods in practice, so therefore you can't really look up and find, right, this issue about whether you need the one Whether you need the one sign or the two signs depends on it. It has to be a situation where you're going to mix up these specific type of fish. I'm not quite sure how practical this comes out to be. Amar Rav Papa, the Rav Papa says Hilchos of the halacha is Adje Rosh v'Shedra Nikar Shel Kol Achas ve'Achas. You need to be able to see the head and the spine of every one of these fish in order to be able to determine. And this is where other Mefarshim don't like what Rashi says in order to determine that they're kosher fish. Well, the reason we're looking at the head and the spine here is we're actually trying to identify what kind of fish it is. If I have the spine and I have the head, then I can look at the fish and I say, okay, I know what fish that's a tuna. I know that's a tuna, and therefore that's kosher fish, right? It's not that you're using the head and the spine to determine that it's a kosher fish, because that's problematic, right? So we're identifying the fish, but you have to be able to see it on every piece, because otherwise you don't know what other things are mixed in here. So space. So we asked the following question: simon. If I've got pieces of fish, right, and they've got a sign on them, right, that testifies that they are kosher. Bein bekula and bein memiktsasam. I don't need that sign on every piece, right? I've got a mixture of fish, and some pieces I've got the scales and the fins. Some pieces I don't. Even if 1 out of 100 of them have the fins and scales attached, kulon mutaros. All of them are permissible, right? We're going to presume, we're not going to say that they're mixed, it's a mixed up batch of fish. We're going to presume that all the fish got batched together. It's all the same kind of fish. And that's what you can rely on. And there's a story of a non-Jew. He brought a pitcher of pieces of fish, and they found some fins and scales on one of them. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says this pitcher is all kosher. It's fine because I could see the fins and scales on some of the pieces. Tirgama Rav Papa, yes, Yehuda.
But the fact that some of the fish, the fact that some of the fish were kosher in the basket doesn't mean if there's not kosher fish in the basket, can't they contaminate all the kosher fish at the same time?
It would, right? But we're saying that we're presuming that there are no multiple types. That's not usually how I guess these things are sold. They're usually sold as a bunch of that fish, right? So if you've got chunks of fish, you can presume they're all the same fish. That's what we're saying. Okay, so now Tirgama Rav Papa. Rav Papa explained that which we said that you can assume they're all the same fish. Beshechatichos shavos, right? They're talking about pieces of fish that they all look the same, right? They all look like they're parts of the same fish, right? Then that makes sense, right? That answers sort of Yehuda's point, right? Because if it looks weird, it doesn't look like they're part of the same fish, then you can't rely on them being the same fish. They have to all look like they came from the same fish. If that's true, ma'ila memra. So then what are you saying? Obviously, if all pieces came from the same fish, and I know that one piece of the fish is from a kosher fish, then I know that all the pieces are from a kosher fish. Ma'odatema, what would you have thought? Nechush dilma is rameh. You might have thought that potentially a non-kosher piece may have happened to have fallen in there. Right? It just happened to be, and it happened to look the same and seem the same as the one that had the sign. Kamash Malan, that no, you don't have to worry about that. That's a unusual circumstance. So therefore, you can rely on the group of whole thing being kosher, even if you've got only a sign on one. Hahu arba ditzachanta de'asi lesichra. There was a story of a boat that had tzachanta fish on it that came to Sichra. Nafak Rav Huna bar Chinina, and Rav Huna bar Chinina came out, V'chazabei, Kalfi, he saw that on the boat there were scales, Visharyeh, and he permitted all the fish on the boat. Yes, Brian.
Okay, so I just have a question. Could we not rely on the rove being like, if I found the majority of the fish was salmon and the rest was unidentified, like, or
I don't know that you have to look at every piece.
Right. No, but if the rove, like, if I found 3 pieces of meat and I knew 2 were kosher and 1 was treif, from what I understood, I could eat all the meat.
Yes.
Right. So could we rely on that with the fish as well?
Yes, as long as it doesn't look clearly like it doesn't come from the same fish. If you have 2 pieces of meat and 1 piece of chicken, you can't assume the chicken's kosher because the 2 pieces of meat are kosher.
Right.
Right? That's different. So you have to it has to look like it came from the same place.
Okay.
Right? If you have 3 pieces of chicken three chicken legs, just because two are kosher doesn't mean the other one is, because there's no chicken that has three legs, right? So therefore, you know that one of them came from a different place, right?
Right. Okay.
So Amar le Rava. So Rava said, "Mi ika dishari kai gavno." So he says, who would permit, just because you found scales on the boat, you're permitting all the fish on this boat? That seems a little bit generous. Ba'asr deshchichi kalpi. The answer is that this was um, it could be that they were in some place where they had other fish on the boat that were kosher, and these scales fell from different fish rather than the fish that are here with the boat right now. So be'asr deshchichi kalpi nafak. So nafak shipure de Rava v'asar. So the messengers of Rava went out and they said that this is prohibited. And he was the ruling authority over Rav Huna. And Shipure de Rav Huna, but the messengers of Rav Huna went out, Barchinana, Vishari, and they said it was permissible. Now the Mefarshim explained that it's probably the order is flipped, right? They permitted it first, and then Rava, who is the bigger posek, said, no, you can't permit that. That's not the circumstance. There is reason to believe that these scales are not from the same fish, and that's why you can't rely on it, even though we discussed in a previous thing that you could rely on the fact that one piece is kosher to permit all of them. That's only where you can't presume that the scales came from someplace else. So that's where Rava corrected Rav Huna Bar Chinana's ruling. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti. Rabbi Yirmiyah from Difti says, Ledidi Amar li Rav Papi. Rav Papi told me the following: Kishor Rav Huna Bar Chinana Bitziron Aval Begufon Lo. You know, when Rav Huna Bar Chinana permitted these fish, he wasn't really 100% sure. He permitted the brine that the fish was in. He never permitted the fish themselves. And as we said, you can be more lenient with the brine than with the fish. Amar Rav Ashi says, Didi Amar li Rav Papa. Rav Papa told me, Kishor Rav Huna Bar Chinana Afila Begufon. That's not how I heard the story. I heard the story that Rav Huna Bar Chinana permitted the whole fish. And that's the story. The Ana Lo Meser Asrina. And now, for us, Rav Ashi added on, and us, I'm not going to prohibit the eating of these fish themselves. The Kamarli Rav Papa, because Rav Papa said to me as well that Lo Mishra Sharena, Deha Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmei Deula, Machlokes Litabel Betzidon, Aval Begufan Dibra Kol Ad Shei Rosh V'Shidra Nikar Shel Kol Echad Ve'echad. One second, that sounds like the opposite. Ana Lo Meser Asrina. I think he's saying, I will. I'm going to prohibit it anyway, because Rav Yehuda said the name of Ula before, that the leniency is only in the brine, not the fish themselves. And so therefore, in this circumstance where we're looking for a leniency, there's no reason why we should be lenient and allow the fish to be eaten. So therefore, the fish is not allowed to be eaten, even if the brine potentially could be. Yosef Rabbi Chanina bar Idi Kame de Rav Ada bar Ava. So Rav Chanina bar Idi was sitting before Rav Ada bar Ava. V'Yosef V'Kamer was sitting. He said the following: V'Kavim shehevi areva. If a non-Jew brings a small boat, Malaya Chavios, which is filled with barrels, v'nimtes kilbis achas mehen, and in the barrels, one of the barrels, he's got a kilbis fish. So now, psuchos, if the barrels are all open, so then kulan mutaros, so then they're all permissible, because we're presuming it's all one batch of brine. And that kilbis fish is taking care of all of these barrels, right? It just got poured into different barrels, but it was all one batch. Stumos, if the barrels are sealed, it indicates that each of these is a separate batch. So then he muteras, then just that barrel that they find the kilbis fish in is permissible. The kula nasuros, all the other ones are not. Amar le minolacha, where do you see that from? So the answer is mitlasa kroy shmieli. He says, I know that from three great tzaddikim who told me this. Meirav, Ushmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, both Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. They're the ones who told me this, and that's where I learned that rule from. Okay, Amar Rav Brona, Amar Rav. Kirve dogim ve'uberon, if you have the insides, Brian's question.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask, when we talked about the boatload of scales found, isn't it that every fish that has scales has fins and therefore it's kosher?
That
So
is true.
what's the chashash of like
That's a famous question. Why do we have fins and scales as the simanim when all fish that have scales have fins?
right? So no, like what's the concern about anything being treif at that point?
So, well, the issue is that they couldn't be sure that the scales that they found, they didn't find the scales on the fish. They found the scales on the boat. And so, therefore, the presumption was that the scales came from the fish that were on that boat. And that wasn't a guarantee. That was what they were arguing about. Who says that the scales that are on this boat come from those fish?
Okay.
That's where the issue was. Okay, Amar Rav Brona Amar Rav. Rav Brona said Amar Rav, Kirve dogim v'uberon. If you have the internal organs of the fish, we'll call the fish innards and the roe of the fish, Ein nikachen element mumcha. You can only buy those from an expert who can tell whether these came from a kosher fish. Yes, Dad, are you raising your hand? Let's get the clapping, but it's a raised hand. Yes, Dad, you're muted.
There was in the 1800s a fish found that had scales and no fins. It was I think they called it a dogfish, something like that.
There was a
Uh,
fish that had one and not the other?
yes, yeah, it had scales but no fins. So
Okay.
I'll look up the story again. I'll look up the story. Rabbi Bernstein, Isaac Bernstein told the story. I'll have to look it up.
I think it was called a hagfish.
Okay, yeah,
But
yeah.
it wasn't that it didn't have fins. It didn't have fins in the common way. It's still considered to have fins, but it wasn't like your stand. I believe that was what
All right, good. So fine. So that explains. The Torah knew there was one species that would stand out, and that's the point. Okay, but good answer. So now, Rami le Ula Rebbe Dostoy Dimin Biri. So he asked Ula asked the following question, Rabbi Dostoy from Biri. Midikama Rav. Now, the fact that Rav said that kirve dogim ve'urban, that you can only buy the fish innards and the roe, unless only if you're buying it from an expert. Miklal dedag tome isle ubar. That means that non-kosher fish have lay eggs, right? But we have a contradiction to that. And the Brisa says, dog tame mashritz, that a non-kosher fish gives birth to live fish. They don't give birth to eggs. So there's no such thing as non-kosher fish eggs. Dog tar, metel beitzim, only kosher fish lay eggs. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying that that was their tradition in the Brisa. So Rav Dostoy answered, Ula, sami mikan. So you're right. You've got to take that word roe out of the brisa, because in fact, all fish eggs must be coming from a kosher fish. So Amarli Rabbi Zera said, no, lo tisami, don't take that out, because tarvaihu matili beitzin. Both kosher fish and non-kosher fish have eggs. Ela ze mashritz mibechutz, v'zeh mashritz mibefnim. The only difference between the two of them is where the fish hatch. In non-kosher fish, they have eggs, and then they hatch inside the mother fish, and then they release into the wild as live fish. Whereas kosher fish, they lay eggs, and then the eggs sit outside of the mother, and then they hatch later. So I don't know if it seems not factual, but I'm just saying, like, Brian looks like he's looking that up. Good. You can check that somebody does verify this information here. Right? Whether we can have non-kosher caviar or whether it all must come from kosher fish. Right?
Got fact checking going on the spot.
Okay, so now the Gemara wants to lama li mumcha. Why do I need an expert in order to check the eggs of the fish? Right? According to the opinion that there are eggs, right? So I'm going to cut the non-kosher fish open. I'm going to take out the eggs. So I could have non-kosher caviar. If that's the case, so then why do I need an expert? Livdok b'simanim. Just look at the eggs itself. You could tell by looking at it, right? The Tanyas, we learn a brisa. Kesimani beitzim kach simani dogim. The way to tell whether you have a kosher fish egg is the same way to tell the way that you have a kosher egg, bird egg. And that is simani dogim sakodaitan. What do you mean? The kosher, because it actually says the way to tell if you have kosher fish is the same way to look at kosher eggs. But that makes no sense because fish have nothing to do with eggs. Fish don't look like eggs. Rather, simani dogim snapi v'kaskesses ksibu, because by fish, it's fins and scales, and there's no fins and scales on eggs. So therefore, that's not what it means. Ella kesimani beitzim kach simani uberi. We're saying that just like the way that kosher bird eggs look, that's the way kosher fish eggs look. And how is that? Uberi dogim. The Elohein simani beitzim. This is the way that you could tell if a bird egg is kosher. Kol shekoderes. It is as long as it is thin on one end, the algugeles, and it's round in the middle, right? It's rounded egg, it's rounded in the middle and pointy on one end. Rosha echad kad, and it's wide on one bottom. The rosha echad chad, the other side is skinny, right? So then tahora, that is a kosher egg. If you imagine the classic chicken egg, that sounds exactly like that. It's pointy on one end, it's wider on the other end, and round. Shnei roshei echadin, if you've got an egg that are pointy on both ends, shnei roshei echadin, or round all the way around, tameya, that is a non-kosher egg. And chelmon mi bachutz, the chelbon mi bafnim, if you've got the yellow yolk of the egg on the outside, and you've got the albumin, that's the white part of the egg, on the inside, tameya, that's a non-kosher egg. But if you've got the yellow in the middle and you've got the albumin surrounding the yolk, that's tahor, that's a kosher egg. If you've got the yolk and the albumin mixed together inside of the egg, zuhi beitzas hasheretz, then you know you're looking at the egg of a sheretz, not a bird at all, right? You're looking at a sheretz egg. So, interestingly, I thought to myself, we don't always know whether certain birds are kosher or not. So why don't we decide by looking at their eggs, because we should know by looking at their eggs whether these birds are kosher or not, right? Turkey was a big question for a long time in the 1800s, whether it was kosher or was not kosher. We should just look at the shape of the egg of the turkey and decide whether it's kosher egg, and then we would know if a turkey is a kosher bird or not. And apparently, as I looked up the OU, we do not rely on these shape of eggs as a reliable kosher sign. Even the Gemara seems to imply that this is a fact. It is not universal. The Torah does not say these things. These seem to be observations that they made, and perhaps they were correct in the locations that they lived in, but it's not necessarily 100% accurate. Brian, yes. What do we learn?
So there are fish that lay eggs externally that are not kosher. Catfish do it, sturgeon do it, eel do it, and paddlefish do it.
So there you go. I don't know. Just saying. I think that this Gemara is probably talking about the fish that they had, although eels they had, right? So we're going to see the Gemara does talk about eels momentarily. So I don't know. Let's say I don't know. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, Kesheni Muchul. We're talking about the fish eggs are all mushed up. So you can't look at their shape, right? So therefore, then you got to go to an expert. You got to go to somebody you trust in order to verify that you're dealing with kosher eggs. According to Rabbi Dostoi, maybe this is just Rabbi Dostoi's opinion, not everybody else's opinion. According to Rabbi Dostoi, who says that you have to take a row out because there's no fish eggs from non-kosher fish. We're on Mem on the base. Vehatanya, we learn a brisa. Kesimani beitzim kachsimani over ubre dogim. How is he going to understand this brisa that says that the ways to know whether a kosher egg is the same ways to look at the inner he's going to the way to look, he's going to say it's the way to, you can't explain it as the row of fish because he says there is no row of non-kosher fish. So lav tiruti mitar salach, you've already changed the text. You already had to adjust what it said here. So therefore, what you have to do is simani kirve dogim. You're going to say it is the way to look at eggs is going to be the same way as you look at the innards of fish, right? The same shape of an egg is the way to tell that a kosher fish has the same internal organs of the same shape as an egg, as a kosher egg. So so where do you see that? Look at the inside of a fish, and you don't see that their organs look that way. So the answer is bisiname kirve dogim shehek. So heichi mishkachas bisimani kirve dogim shehekad v'chad. So where do you see this egg-shaped internal organs of a fish? So the answer is mishkachas la b'shilhucha. You know by the air bladder. I guess that's the part of the fish that controls the buoyancy of the fish. And so it apparently has an egg shape to it, and kosher fish has kosher egg shape to it. So im ein sham mumcha mais. Okay, so what do you do? If you have no experts, so what are you supposed to do? So Rabbi Yehuda says, Kevin Damarani malachtim mutarin. If you go to a Jewish fisherman and he says, I'm the one who got this fat or these eggs from the fish, you could trust him, right? That's fine. Kosher guy. So Rav Nachman Amar, Ad Shiomer Elu Dogim Ve'elu Kirvehem. He has to be able to say, this is the fish. He has to show you the fish. This is the fish I took it from. Then you can identify for yourself that it's a kosher fish that it came from. Orule Rabbi Yehuda le'ada daila kevan da'amar ani melachtim mutarin. So what he says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda said to Ada that who was his servant. Once he says, I'm the one who I saw this kosher fish, this product come from this kosher fish, that's enough to permit it, and that's acceptable. Okay, the next thing we have is Allah shel chiltus, the chiltus that comes from the leaves of this plant. So pshita, it's obvious. If it comes right from the plant, you see that it's fresh, and there's no reason why the plant, any of these products that come from the plant, would be prohibited. So the answer is lo nitzricha el lekurton shabo. The answer is that we're talking about if you got a bag of this, and inside the bag are some loose seeds. So Ma'odetema, would you have thought Nechosh Dilma Maisi Umarevbe, that maybe the non-Jew came and he took some of the ones that he cut with the non-kosher knife and he mixed it into the one from this branch. So Kamash Malon, so this comes to show us that that's not how they would do it. Any of the loose ones in the container must have come from and fallen off this leaf, and therefore they are fine. They've not been touched by the non-kosher knife, and you're okay. Next, yes, Brian.
Just to tell you, I looked up on AI. There is no fish that scales that doesn't have fins.
Okay,
right?
So there you go.
Yeah.
According to AI, my father.
According to AI, no, one AI Meta said
real.
found.
Yes.
No, it's the Meta found ones that were Meta AI said that they weren't common scales, but OpenAI says ChatGPT that no, it doesn't exist.
So there you go. Okay. If we've got olives pressed into the circular container pshita, those are fine. What's the problem with olives? Lo tuva, even though they're very soft, you would have thought that he must have put wine into it. Kamash Milan. So this comes to tell me, honey machmas mishchahu derafu. They're only soft because of the oil that's coming out, and they're fine. The Rabbi Yossi Amar Shlochen Asur, and Rabbi Yossi says the ones that the pits come right out, those are prohibited. Hechi dami. What's the case there? What are Shlochen? Amar Rav Yossi Bar Chinena Kol she'ochso biyado. As long as you pick the olive up, the garinaso nishmetes, and the pit falls right out. Those are the ones Rav Yossi you got to worry about because they may have added wine to those. Chagovin haboin. Then we had chagovin, which are Chagavin, the Bryces talks of Chagavin, these are the grasshoppers that come from the basket in front of the store owner. Those you have to worry about. And also kafrisin. So he says, we learned in a Brysa that Chagavin v'hakafrisin, which is the husks of what did we say? There were husks of the caper bush. Right, remember?
Yep, the caper berries, exactly.
That if they come from the storehouse, umina heptek, umina sfina, or from the basket that's in the back, I guess, for selling the box, or from the ship, mutar, those are fine. Hanipkarin bekatluza lifnei vanin, but if you've got the ones that are in the market in front of the salesperson, asurin, those are prohibited. Why? Because in order to make them look really appealing, he pours wine on them, right? And so therefore he makes them shiny and look fatty and whatever, and so therefore that's why you can't use those. But he's not going to pour wine on the ones in the storehouse because then it'll go bad, right? So those are fresh. The ones in the storehouse are fine. The ones in the store out there on display, those are the ones you should not have. Also, apple cider, right, for non-Jews. If it comes from the storehouse, minha heptek, umina salula, comes from the storage containers or from the barrels or wherever it's from. He says that those are fine. So those are mutarin. Animkar bekatluza, but the ones in the marketplace are also prohibited. Mimnesh ma'arvabo yain, because they mix wine into them. Tana Rabbanas rabbis learned Pamachas chash Rebbe b'meyav. Rebbe once had a bad stomachache. Amar klum yesh adam shodeh yayin tapuchim shel obdei kochavim asur mutter. Does anybody know if you can buy apple cider from a non-Jew and use it? So Amar lefanav Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi pamachas chash abba b'meav. So Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi said, "Hey, one time my father got a stomachache. Ve'eviu lo yayin yet tapuchim shel obdei kochavim." They brought him apple cider from a non-Jew, shel ayin shana, which was 70 years old, which is quite a significant, and I guess his age, so therefore nothing had been added to it. Vishasan, he drank it, vinisrape, and he felt better. Amar lo, he said to him, Kokach haya biyadcha, you knew this story, Vatam mitzarani, and you're letting me suffer? You knew it was kosher? I didn't. What? Badko matzo ovi kochavim echad shahayel lo sholosh mios garbe yayin shel tapuchim. They went searching and they found a guy. They found a non-Jew, and he had 300 barrels of apple cider, shel ayin shana, which were 70 years old. Vishasan, he drank from it, vinisrape, and he felt better. So there you go. So Amar Baruch HaMakom, he blessed Hashem, Shemasar Olamo, Lishomrim, that handed off the world to those who guard it and protect it. I think that he was praising Rabbi Yishmael for knowing the answer to that question. I think that's what the praise is, Baruch for the Shomrim. Right. So okay, or he was blessing those that are what do you call it? That are able to know what the cures are for various illnesses. I'm not sure which of the two. The last thing the Mishnah says, truma. Truma is also able to be purchased from the storehouse if Kohen is selling truma versus in front of him. So my v'chein truma, what does that mean? Also truma. Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, v'chein lekohen achoshu limkor truma l'shem chulin. If you've got a Kohen and he is suspected of selling his truma and not telling anybody that's truma. See, truma sells at a lower market price because truma can only be eaten by a Kohen. So if I'm a Kohen and somebody gives me truma and I want to sell it, the only people who can buy it are other Kohanim. And it's the law of supply and demand. So since there's less demand, the price goes down. So what this Kohen decides he's going to do is he's going to sell it. He's going to sell his truma, but he's not going to tell anybody it's truma. So therefore, he's selling it at regular market price. So if he does, lefanav hu da'aser, the stuff that he's selling right in front of him, don't buy from him because you can't trust him. Aval habamina otzer. But if you tell him, could you go to the back and get me some stuff? That's fine. Min heptake or from the container. Umina slula mutter. Those are all fine. He can buy it from those places. Why? Because you're tusig mirtos. Because he's a little bit concerned. He knows he could get caught. So what happens if the chachamim catch him? They're going to confiscate his goods. And okay, if they catch the stuff that he's got in the basket in front of him, they confiscate that. He's going to lose what? The profit of today's goods. But if they catch him and they confiscate his entire storehouse of truma, that could be a significant loss. So therefore, savar sham ibe rabbanon umafsul minoi. The rabbanon are going to find out about it and they're going to take it from me, and I don't want to get caught. So therefore, you're not worried about him playing this trick with large quantities. So if he goes and gets it from the storehouse in the back and tells you that it is chulin, you can trust that. Hadron alach ein ma'amidin, hadron alach ein ma'amidin, hadron alach ein ma'amidin. That concludes Perek 2 of Avodah Zara.
Wow, shkoyach, amazing. We weren't sure if we were going to get to this point, but look, you got us there. Amazing. Right. And so begins Volume 2, Mir Shem, tomorrow night.
Volume 2, that's correct. Yes.
Wow, wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi Loiterman.
Thank you, Rabbi Loiterman. That was fantastic.
Fantastic. It's a good thing I have my Volume 2 here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're equipped. You're ready to go. And thank you, Reb Aaron, for the photo. I was wondering if you're going to be able to do it. I saw you were on the go for a bit. I was worried maybe it wouldn't materialize, but there it is.
I have to think of a harder challenge.
Yehuda, you liked it?
I've seen better.
San Francisco is my favorite so far.
Yeah, that was a great one. That was a great one.
All right, everyone.
All right, gentlemen. Have a great night.
Yeah, have a good night.
See you tomorrow night. Take care, guys.